Hey,
Hello
YouTube.
out there in radio and television land.
Yeah, we're gonna go live on radio and television and the internet.
Okay.
YouTube is sort of all at the same time. It's radio, television, internet, everything at the same time.
Mhm.
Facebook, social media.
What do you think about community?
Let me record now. Okay, let me start. Let's go. I think now we're live and we're recording, Michael. Go ahead.
All right. What do you think about community? Post it in the comments below.
The you're asking the viewer, so you're breaking the fourth wall already.
Well.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, join the discussion, guys. We have a comment section. Let us know in the comments. All right, what do we think? Because we need to talk about something so the viewers can actually listen to us. So what do you guys think about community? Do you guys have any initial thoughts? I wrote like 12 different questions about it, but maybe you guys can, if you guys have an initial thought about community that we can explore, we can start there.
Well, I think it's a pretty good idea myself.
What, community?
Sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think
Tell us one of your questions and we'll know
Okay.
how to launch it.
We can start. I don't know which one. I don't actually have one that I like to start. I mean, actually, I have one that I haven't written that I think is probably better than the other ones to kickstart.
Okay.
So what is community? Like what, and more precisely, like what kinds, what comes to mind when I say community? Let's talk about community. To me, I think it's a very interesting topic, but just to start the conversation, what do you guys like think when I say let's talk about community? What comes to mind?
I guess the people that live in your neighborhood, maybe if you're religious, people that go to your church or synagogue, your school, people you work with, that's, and your friends, I guess that's community. Now, actually, I think what us philosophers, I don't really think that fits under any of the categories I just said. So maybe just, well, friends, I guess, or people that share your interests. Yeah. I think community is good because you can leverage everyone's strengths. So like different people may have different, skills, personality traits, and you can all sort of help each other out and benefit from that.
All right, that's really good.
So
Actually, I hadn't.
basically a
Yeah, go
group
ahead.
of people who have things in common, right? That's really what it kind of boils down to. And that's why we're here. I mean, when I look at the smiling faces in the Zoom meeting, I see community. And that's true of some, although not all of the other online type meetings and conferences that I participate in. But this one most definitely is.
You mentioned common interests. So I think that's often a characteristic, but I don't even think you necessarily need a common interest to have a community. Like,
No, it's just something in common, not necessarily even an interest, but.
Okay. But yeah, like you could have people that live in the same neighborhood that are very different, but it's still like a community, or people at your school. You could be very different from a lot of them, but it could still be called a community. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you guys think, David, Carolyn, Mario? If you want to jump in, well, what do you guys think?
I'm just I'm listening because I'm trying to figure out exactly what you mean. I understand the word community, but to say that we're going to discuss community in a way is kind of like saying we're going to talk about cars. But what you really want to talk about is Toyotas. And that's only one kind of car. And I don't know what kind we're after here yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think that was a good way to start, actually, because that way we have different perspectives, right? And yeah, it is true that it's a very broad topic, but I think like what Michael and Craig said, notice that they mention a bunch of different things, right? And those are, and in fact, you mentioned something that I didn't think about, Michael, which is religion or religious organizations. But I think community can be a lot of different things. You know, we can be talking about religious organizations. We can be talking about universities and schools. We can be talking about corporations, armies, criminal, organized crime, government,
Philosophers.
philosophy. I mean, groups of interest, which is just something that Craig mentioned. You know, people that have the same interests coming together in a group. And then, you know, the most fundamental types of community, which are really, you know, the tribe, the family, the tribe, the nation, the city. When you are physically with people sharing the same space, and you have to try to figure out how to live in that same space, and that's really what a nation is, right? So that's, you know, there are different types of community, but there's always I think that there's certainly a common element, which is the fact that you share your life with people for some reason. You share your life with people. You're associated with with those people, and you have to figure out how to make it work, right? So there's those are the similarities, and I think here a big part of why, you know, I try to bring everybody together to discuss something that we're all interested in, which is philosophy in general, the world in general. We discuss like all sorts of things about the world, but we like to think about the universe. But you know, it's really about building a community, building and maybe that's the first question that I want to ask you guys is like, I think it's a very fundamental part of human nature, you know, this need to be in a community of sharing your life with others. And I would like to know, like, what do you guys think about that? Is that really a fundamental part of human nature, or do you disagree about that?
I think it is pretty fundamental, even more so to humans than most animals. I feel like humans are unique in that societies have people with a large number of roles. So one thing I'm kind of interested in it is, are there any animals that they have like lots of different roles in their society? I don't know if chimpanzees have that, but humans, there's so many different types of humans and so many different things they bring to the table. So we all kind of rely on each other for our own expertise and like traits. Whereas other animals, like if you're like a jaguar, there's only, I mean, all jaguars are not significantly different from one another. Maybe some are stronger, some, but like ultimately they're all kind of trying to do the same thing. Whereas humans are just so diverse, and so we benefit from that diversity.
And I understand what you're saying, and we may be that diversity can, although that probably exists in other creatures, it's really prevalent in human beings because I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a husband. You know, I'm all those. All that's a diversity all in one person. You know, and all of you have that. You know.
Yeah, humans are very unique. Like most other animals, you know, I hate to say, like people like to think that their dog is special because they have a personality that no other dogs have. But I mean, maybe to some like small extent, but I mean, most dogs, you know, they're hungry, they want the same food, you know, they act very similarly, but humans do not. Humans are very varied, and so we benefit from that because we can take each other's best characteristics and use it to our benefits.
Well, I agree that we're very unique animals in the sense that we are very complex, and a lot of other animals, they might have communities, but a lot of what they do is instinct, right? It's very biological the way they're organized. It's just something that is instilled in them by their biological code. So that translates into sort of what you're saying, right, Michael? You know, all dogs are going to behave more or less the same way, you know, because there isn't really much room for divergence there. A lot of it comes from biology, but a lot of what we do doesn't really come from biology. You know, we have a biological background, obviously. You know, we all, for example, have sexual instincts, which is a biological thing, you know, because we're supposed to produce offspring, you know. But then the way people look at, you know, sex and love, you know, and interaction between men and women can be very, very different depending on the society, depending on the time period, right? Depending on the geography, depending which kind of community you're born into, right? So we've developed like very complex societies, very for us, community is not just very complex, it's also very diverse, because we make up a lot of this stuff. It's not just biology. So there's a lot of differences.
Yeah, I mean, other animals stay in groups, right? Like a school of fish, you know, they all swim together, a pack of hyenas or a pack of wolves, but I don't think they leverage each other's unique talents the same way humans do.
Yeah, we've invented specialization.
Yeah, we're way more specialized. So yeah. So I think oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, just want to jump in and say something quick. So what I do agree with the terms and definition you all just put out here. But what I'm interested in when it comes to community and what I think could be harmful is whether we overdo it publicly, categorize and group people into communities publicly and just say, you know, this community, that community. I think this approach have a tendency to segregate people into, you know, different categories and groups and types that could potentially be harmful. You know, we would like to think about ourselves as humans as just one, you know, human race, and that's it. But obviously, there is something called community, and there's a definition for it, and that's there. My point is that to be careful not to over label each other's in terms of groups. Whenever we do something, we could say, yeah, we're the community of this or community of that, and that could potentially have harmful effects.
The way I interpret what you're talking about, Mario, is identity politics. Are you talking about identity politics?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all white people don't think the same way. All black people don't think the same way. Yeah.
And I think in an ideal community, you have a diversity of thinkers, so that I think that's better than having everyone thinking the same way and just reinforcing each other.
Which we've all done so far.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mario. I mean, and part of the interesting, we're talking about like different kinds of communities, right? But one of the interesting things, and also something that is somewhat peculiar to humans, or completely peculiar to humans, is the fact that we have a community, right? Which is, I guess, our country, our nation where we live, but or our city, if you want to be more specific, where we live. But we have all these other communities that there's a lot of overlapping, right? So you are part of not just one community, but you're part of many different communities at the same time, and that creates some of the I guess the problems, or the questions that Mario is raising, right? Like, yes, you can be, like, for example, African American, part of the African American community, and you can also be part of the American community, or the New York community, or the Philadelphia community, right? And then those two things are both true, but they overlap, and sometimes there are divergences, sometimes there are conflicts. You're different, basically your different communities, they can gel very well, or sometimes they don't, and regardless of that, there's always going to be one person today will always belong to many different communities and will share traits of many different communities. And that's great, but that can create problems as well. And I agree with you, Mario. Yeah, I mean, it's if we are talking about identity politics, I think that's a vice. That's a vice in modern discourse.
Well, let me put it this way. It occurs to me that not all people of a particular subset, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, not all people in any of those categories think exactly alike. And sometimes what we hear is, this is how those people think, and this is how those, and I don't like any of that, because that's not how it works, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And also, yeah, and there's one thing that is true, and I was pondering talking about truth today instead of community. I think that's an interesting, also very broad topic, but there are some specific questions that I want to talk about. But one thing that the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when we do those generalizations about community, and like you're saying, David, we attribute the same thing to everybody. I mean, those are really just oversimplifications of reality, right? It's not really reality, right? There's not one reality for just for the sake of the argument, all African Americans, it's just not a reality. That's not true. There are some mostly historical processes that might be common to all African Americans, or the majority, but certainly they are very different people. We're talking about what, 20 million people or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of difference there, and that applies to all these identity politics categories that people come up with. I absolutely agree. And those oversimplifications really do much more harm than they possibly can do good.
This is only tangentially related, but something that you were saying reminded me of this. A while ago, I was suckered in by a clickbait title on a YouTube video. And the title of it was "The Greatest Movie Heroines of All Time." And I don't know, that maybe 10, 15 movie heroines. And not one of the movies was made before 1990. So it may have been all time for the people who made the movie, the video, but it wasn't. Well, I consider Ellen Ripley one of the greatest female movie heroines of all time, and she wasn't included. So,
well, that's a crazy list if you don't include Ripley.
Yeah,
she's number one.
It was clickbait, and I fell for it, but nevertheless.
Yeah, but like all these ideas about how men are bad and females are great, like, for example, this is a gross oversimplification of what some people think. But I mean, basically these simplifications, I mean, they are out there, and I mean, it's just so stupid, really. I mean, it's a lot of, like, when people try to simplify things to to a great degree. I mean, they fail spectacularly, and you really don't solve any issues. I mean, what you do is you create new problems.
I agree.
Well, I guess we've gotten a pretty good dose of the straight white male perspective on this issue.
Maybe so.
So are you
but again,
placing
I
us
mean,
all in that category, Craig?
but I mean, straight white
To the
males.
best of my knowledge, I think we all, except of course Carolyn, and I'm not sure about Mario, but the four of us who I can see at the moment, I think we all are members of that intersection of those communities. Yes.
But Bruno's Portuguese. Bruno, are you white? I thought you're Portuguese.
I don't know, man. Whatever you want.
Uh-huh.
Whatever you want me to be, I can be.
Okay.
I mean, we've talked about it a different day. I don't know, like
Okay.
I don't know, from an American perspective. I don't
We
know.
can table that discussion, but yeah.
So,
I don't know what that means.
That's it.
Bruno, tell us what all Portuguese think.
Yeah.
What?
Tell us
Tell
what
us
all
what all
Portuguese
Portuguese think.
Well, I think, Americans' ideas about race are certainly different from anything I had encountered before. Yeah, so the way people see race in the States, I mean, it's kind of like strange to me.
That's an interesting point, though, because I personally not sure not that it matters, but not sure what race I belong to. I come from Lebanon, from the Middle East, and really, when I'm asked this poll or question in a form, like, what's your race? I mean, am I white? Am I, is there a Middle Eastern race? Like, what am I?
Yeah,
I think the correct answer to all those kinds of questions is almost always human.
Yeah.
That's the race that I
I wish
identify
that's
with.
an option to select on that form.
it should
I
be
can
an
do
option.
other.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, to answer your question, like I had never thought of myself as anything other than white before, coming here. But here, I mean, it's weird. I don't know. Like, what's white? I mean, like, I don't know what white is for Americans. I think it varies. Like,
Yeah, no, actually, I think at least the way on forms that you fill out, I think like anyone of European ancestry or a Western European ancestry, they could be considered white. So I think, yeah, you would be considered white by that standard, which is kind of silly, but yeah.
Well, my wife is of Lebanese descent, and she is identified as Caucasian on all those kinds of bloody, stupid things on forms. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
If you think about it, sorry.
No. I was just gonna say, yeah, Mario. I think like I have no idea like what Americans think, but I mean, for me, like in my opinion, like Lebanese is mostly like Caucasian people, which is, but again, those are all really, I mean, to a great degree, social constructs and historical and cultural constructs. I mean, yeah. So a lot of this stuff is made up. I mean, the idea, for example, that Southern European people or people of Southern European ancestry are not white is a very, I think, Anglo-Saxon concept. That's why I think I hadn't encountered it before. Not even when I lived in the UK, which is funny. But I think in the United States, people see things differently. But
Yeah, like if you look at your whatever this service they do, 23andMe or something, to see like what does your DNA tell you about where you come from and what's your ancestry look like, you could be a mix of variety of different things, right? I mean, from Lebanon, who knows, I might be maybe Turkish, a little bit European, a little bit who knows what. So if we're thinking about race in terms of genes, in terms of your ancestors, and if that's a mix, then how do you say what race you are? Is it like the majority of that DNA, ancestors' DNA, or what? No idea.
Well, it's really the truth is like what Craig is saying. I mean, yeah, I mean it's largely accurate that, you know, if we're being accurate, you know, human is really the accurate description, you know, because
Yeah, we all came from Africa.
we all came from Africa and we're really like very mixed. Like, for example, especially when you look at any society in the Americas, it's really people intermarried. The only difference is like some people intermarried with people from different continents. But I mean, even just the idea of like one European race, I mean, that's not really a reality. I mean, Europeans like have many different ethnicities, you know, so the idea of like one European race is, I think it's a fairly modern concept, and it started with colonization. Basically, it's us or the people that we're colonizing or, you know, enslaving, you know. So before that, I don't think there was really the idea of a pan-European race or ethnicity.
It was not unlike our discussion of religion and mythology before, whereas I am this and it's good, and you are that and it's less good. And that pretty much is how, and I'm not sure, you know, when that started. I suspect it started a long time ago, but we know that it spread wildly with, you know, the European colonialists, with the Mongols, with, but pretty much anybody who decided they were going to build an empire and have an army of conquest and go and take territory and kill the men and rape the women, because that's what they did there to spread their genes.
I mean, a lot of some of us might still have the Genghis Khan genes, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
He was very prolific.
I would guarantee that there are people in this conference room who will, you could trace to find Mongolian-based genetics. In, I mean, I'm Slovenian, and
I mean, if
know
you have some relation to Europe, I mean,
I
there's a
don't know
lot
if,
of different genes.
yeah, I don't know if they made it that far. I'm pretty sure the Huns did, and I'm pretty sure the Scythians did. And so there's all sorts of fascinating, I mean, you like pirates, you know, read about the Scythians sometime. Actually, if you like pirates, you'll, I mean, they were horseback rather than ship-based, but you'll like the Scythians.
I want to, yeah. I'm in the pirate kick, so yeah. And Scythian, I've never read about it, but I've always been kind of interested. So yeah, good to know. Also, I mean, if you understand, like, if you look at European history, really, I mean, there's been a whole lot of like mixture, you know, like, for example, like the history of the Anglo-Saxon race really is a history of repeated invasion and, you know, pillage and rape. So like how you can extrapolate that there's some sort of actual racial purity there, I don't know. I think it makes sense if you're not really looking at history.
We're all mutts, basically, when it comes down to it. And the more we become mutts, I think the better that it is. The more that we become in some of those senses, homogeneous societies, I think is good. And is right, traditionally right in Europe, why the way you'd cement an alliance is you'd marry off someone to an appropriate person of nobility in the warring group, and then you shared family, and then you weren't enemies anymore. So if we want to be friends with one another, we need to interbreed a lot.
Well, and that's a good, you know, that's certainly true, and that's you know, true throughout human history. I mean, intermarriage is really one of the main ways how people build communities. And I mean, if you look at European history, for example, I mean, it's really an intermarriage, consensual and non-consensual, of Latin types and Germanic types, really, especially European, Western European history. But it's true, like, for most regions of the world. I think the only really big exception is like American colonialism, because people were encountering very different civilizations, and they wanted to be superior to them in some sense. I mean, it just made sense from an economic perspective. and I guess social perspective to some extent. And even then, there's a pretty like marked difference between Portuguese and Spanish colonization, which were more open to intermarriage and intermixing, and English colonization, which they tried to keep it separate between Anglo-Saxon, African, and Indian. I don't know why exactly.
You know,
I have to read more about it.
I think even if people if they look similar or close to, if they look close, they'll still find a way. I think some people do find a way to get in conflicts, you know, just over language that has existed. There's just, yeah, there is this, people just find the smallest thing about each other and then fight over it, you know. Language is a crazy one that I don't get, because it's a language, right? You can learn it.
Yeah.
But then there is conflict even among that. So yeah.
Well, language is very, very associated with community and identity. I think we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, it's like language is really one of the central features of a community to some extent.
Let me ask a question that's maybe slightly not totally on this specific points that you're making, but would it, and I think it's related to community in some respects, would it be better if, for example, in America, we did not have states, we were just all lumped into one huge country, and that kind of follows up with globalization. Is like, okay, if okay to do America as one country without states, without, you know, the community of belonging to a specific state, then we can think about, you know, what about the world? Would it make sense to have a one world where with all humans in it, without actual borders, without entities and all of that? I mean, at the end, this is all kind of manufactured stories, and you know, if you've seen the TED Talk or you heard Yuval Noah Harari, you would know what I'm talking about. That all of that is just made up stories that we put to ourselves to kind of separate things, but it's not really part of reality. So would you guys think it's better if we did not have states, for example, in the US to begin with?
Well, I don't think so. I think like in the US, states are very different from each other. I don't think like a policy in like California or Washington would go well in some of the areas in the Midwest. I think that's very unique about America. So I would also say that about the world, like different policies cannot really go to another place, you know. Even in Minnesota here, like the policies in Minneapolis, it doesn't really relate to the people even 2 hours away from Minneapolis. So I don't think that would be very beneficial. That's just my opinion.
Well, I would go even farther, Mario. I would say, like, I think in the United States, it doesn't really matter, honestly. I mean, I think the fact that there are different states today, I mean, there's no real difference between the states. I mean, there is culturally, but like in terms of government, it's really the same country. You know, it's a federation, and I think it's good that it's a federation. I think it's a great model. But it's the things that matter. I mean, I think they are to the benefit of the whole nation. But I would go farther and say I think we really need. I think the model of the nation state is obsolete. So I think those national stories, like to paraphrase the Harari a little bit, because you brought him up. But you know, I think that's like something that really comes from the past in the 17th, 18th century, 19th century, and 20th century. It doesn't really, like, it's not a good model for the 21st century. I've said this before, but I think, yeah, it's one of my, I think really the going forward, I mean, we need to like go a little bit beyond that and start thinking about ourselves as humans, because we really have a globalized world. So and a lot of the challenges that we have today, we can't really face them with the fiction of the national states and the nations and I mean, what has really nationalism brought to the world? I mean, it has brought a whole lot of problems and very, very, very ugly things, and it keeps doing that. So.
So I suppose like national and state lines are drawn so that like legislation is distinct. Like if there was just like a world government, would that just, I don't know.
I
It
think
makes
that would,
administration easier, right? Because you're just administering that section of land, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, a great thing that the United States has kind of like championed or has been a pioneer in that, but a lot of other countries have adopted that, including Europe as in the European Union. So, like federalism really allows you to have the best of both worlds, because you can have a very big government, but at the same time, you can provide people with a very high degree of self-governance, which is really the ideal thing of both systems. A lot of our problem in the past is that we did try to, there were people in the past that have tried to create sort of a world empire. You know, for example, that was the dream of Alexander, and we're talking about intermarriage before. His whole dream was to, let's bring together, and he really didn't think the world was that big. In his, like, as far as they knew, the known world had pretty much all been conquered by Alexander, and he wanted just people to be all united and all be essentially part of the same polis and intermarry. But that was difficult to do through just war, and it created a whole lot of problems. That's why empires always fell. But now we have found other ways. You know, I think federalism and voluntary union of liberal democracies, I think that's a much better way to move forward. And we can under those models, those modern models like the United Nations, especially the European Union, we can really have the best of both worlds. You know, we can not be a constant war and division with each other, but we can also have a great degree of independence and self-governance, which is also important.
So
And
So there should, like, ideally there would be a way of like keeping administration separate so it's easier to handle, but without those boundaries becoming a part of people's identities. So like that would be the ideal.
Can you repeat that?
So
Yeah, I didn't catch all of that.
ideally, like, so there'd be lines drawn to keep like legislations separate so that they're taking care of only one area, but those boundaries don't become part of people's identities so that there's no nationalism.
I think I'm not sure I understand exactly what you said, but I think a one world government would be ideal, but I am not sure that humanity is mature enough to do that. And the reason I say that is how would a just one world government deal with religions like the Taliban, who think that teaching women how to read is bad?
Yeah, like that's kind of the problem. Like the thing standing in the way of world government is it'd be too hard to govern the whole world, I guess.
Yeah. I think that may be one of the things, but yeah, that makes it hard. How would we deal with that? You know, I look forward to the day when human rights, but I have a question about the maturity of the human race to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm not so sure if we're like completely mature enough to do that. I think it's been working pretty well in the European Union, but again, you need to have, I think that's the key. You need to have like a common base first, which in this case, you know, it's in the European Union, it helps that, you know, you have Christianity, you have a certain a sense of European identity. But really the big thing is like liberal democratic ideals, liberal democratic foundation. And that obviously is something that you're not going to find common ground with the Taliban, right? You're not going to find common. So you need to, yes, there should be a world government, but obviously you need a framework, right? The United States, you know, you have 50 states, but there's a common framework of the US Constitution that establishes a lot of common, it establishes a blueprint, right? The European Union has adopted that as well. So you always need that blueprint if things are going to work, even in a very federal government.
So like, I know with the European Union, like it hasn't, like it's not working so well. Even in the 90s, there's just a lot of issues just with the European dollar, the European money versus United Kingdom still using the pound, and now obviously Brexit, and then there's like talks from Germany and these other countries. So even in like Europe, right, it's not really working out so well, mostly because I think generally when there is a big organization like this, there are like one country most likely has a little more push and a little more power in this union, right? And that's Germany in Europe. And so people in, you know, United Kingdom, they're not going to like it. People in Spain, they're not going to really like it as much because the policies are not what they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that if it works or not, I mean, that's relative, right? I mean, Brexit showed that yeah, obviously things don't work 100%, but I think that in general, I mean, it really depends on what the bar is, right? I mean, this is the first time ever that Europe has had peace for a sustained period of time, and that's, I think that's a good place to start. You know, for example, also the degree of economic cooperation between countries, the degree of liberty of people to move wherever they want and work in other countries, the degree of cosmopolitanism that has developed in Europe. I mean, I think all those things are really very like recent phenomena and have replaced a lot of what was there before.
So Bruno, I think you meant to say Europe had peace if you weren't an immigrant coming from outside Europe trying to get in, because those are not particularly peaceful and pleasant situations pretty much throughout the EU, and actually was one of the things that helped trigger Brexit, of course, was the Brits' refusal to take in emigres. So you don't romanticize that there is peace in the EU's time, because it's peace for some, but not for others.
Oh, you're talking about a government. You have to define, what do you want the government to do?
Yeah, I mean, there are several problems, Craig, but that's also a matter of perspective, right? But when I meant peace, I meant like not full-on war, you know, between nation states, which was an endemic European problem, and I think it's an endemic world problem as well. And that's one of the big reasons why we need to figure out this world government thing, even if it's a federation. I think it should be a federation, absolutely. But I mean, how likely is it that we're not going to see big wars if we don't have some sort of world government federation?
You know,
And if we have big wars, now we'll have big atomic wars. That's the problem.
yeah, I'd be willing to settle for nuclear disarmament treaties myself, at least in my lifetime, is something to start with.
Yeah, that would be a good start. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult because if you have fully sovereign states, that's the whole thing. You know, that's how the European Union started, actually. It wasn't really a political union. They just figured out if we do an economic union, that France and Germany cannot really go to war with each other because they share the same resources, things will improve. And it did. And, you know, it started as an economic union, and now it's a full-fledged political union. I think it's the same kind of thinking could apply for the Chinas and Russias and the United States of the world.
Well, this is an argument for globalization because the U.S. and Chinese economies are very interconnected. I mean, there is already essentially an economic union between the U.S. and China and most countries in the world. Pretty much WTO is essentially an economic union.
Yeah, true. I mean, there's a degree, and maybe that's why we haven't seen more widespread war. I mean, that's one of the reasons. We certainly already have a great degree of economic globalization. Globalization is already here. It's just not so much political, and it's not but there is obviously a great degree of financial globalization. The problem with the financial globalization is that it's not so much in favor of the people, it's in favor of the corporations. And a lot of the people in the world are really not reaping the benefits of that. So that's a problem. That's another issue altogether.
Well, originally, like when we said the discussion would be about community, like I thought by community, it would be like a group of people. I guess communities can be in different sizes. So, but usually I think, you know, maybe less than a couple thousand people or whatever, but we're expanding community to be like whole nation, right? So, yeah, I feel like that's just something I noticed.
Yeah, no, I agree, Michael. But do you want to talk a little bit about? I think it would be cool if we talked a little bit, if we change the topic a little bit, and because I think that's also part of the community, right? And maybe more what people think about community. They think about these smaller communities. Like, do you think modern life has made a community more or less important for people, like our modern lifestyle?
Okay, this kind of reminds me of something I actually read earlier this week that someone posted on the internet, like their hypothesis kind of why some mental issues exist. So the person posted that currently there's a lot of anonymity in our society. We're largely a face in the crowd, but a long time ago there would be like a small group of people you'd see pretty much every day. And then you'd form strong bonds because of that.
Sorry, you faded in and out there a little bit. So
Yeah,
I
didn't catch.
I think she's raising the question of mental health in modern society. So how that translates to communities. Isn't that right, Carolyn?
Yeah, it had something to do with that. It was someone's idea of why some mental health issues might exist. So if you didn't catch it all, it was basically that in our current society, we're largely a face in the crowd. But a long time ago, we lived with smaller groups of people. With fewer people, we'd see that pretty much every day. And we'd form stronger bonds because of it.
Okay, so Carolyn is saying that when the group is smaller, you develop stronger bonds. But once the group gets too big, then you're just like another person in the crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that. Go ahead, Carolyn.
The person also mentioned a lot of us don't see our friends and family every day.
Yeah,
been a lot of-
I think that could be something interesting to discuss. You know, the fact that before a big city was 200,000 people, that was a huge city. Now, you know, that's nothing. Now we're living in cities that are, you know, here in the Twin Cities, you know, metro area is 3 million people. If you go to New York, it's 20 million people. If you go to Mexico cities, even, you know, more. So we live in these really incredibly huge metro areas, and it's a completely different reality than we've ever faced as humans. So how does that change the way we live?
Trying to remember, there's somebody who did a study and he wrote called Bowling Alone, about looking at the breakdown of communities by looking at people going bowling by themselves. Whereas there used to be, like, bowling leagues used to be a big thing. And that was kind of a sign of the breakdown of community.
Yeah, I remember.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I remember that study. One of my teachers brought it up, but I've heard it multiple times. Yet we don't join as many organizations, like formal organizations, as we used to, like the PTA or, you know, the city council meetings, or like just formal organization membership has gone down.
Well, there's been a breakdown among certain institutions. Religion's a big one, where there's, at least here in the US and Europe, basically, there's been less church attendance has been declining. But yeah, things like bowling leagues and stuff like that, you've definitely, there's, you know, Elks Lodges or things like that.
So do you think that's just specific to religion, or do you think it's I think it's more the second, it's like something that you can see that across the board for all organizations, that there's a decline in that as well?
Yeah, I think the second. I mean, a bowling league is not a religious organization, right?
Yeah. I was going to ask you guys, it's kind of a silly question, but I was just watching the other day a Streetcar Named Desire with Marlon Brando. And, you know, they show in that movie, it's from the 50s, early 50s, and they have those bowling leagues. And I didn't like that. That was weird to me because I have never seen that. But I guess that's what people used to do.
Oh, yeah.
My middle name is Marlon, as in Brando.
Oh, I bet.
Nice. I love Marlon Brando.
My dad picked that.
It's a good
And I
pick.
think he liked Marlon Brando.
What's not to like?
Oh yeah. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Uh-huh.
No, but so we live around a lot more people now, but I don't know. What do you guys think? That do we still have a strong sense of community, or is it harder to be a part of the community these days?
So
I think communities are becoming smaller and smaller. To your question earlier, Bruno, that with the modern life we live in, you know, how did that affect communities? I think so. Before, you used to have, you know, communities based on either a religion or a location, geographical location, and a few others. Now you have, you know, many communities of whatever, like the philosophers in Minneapolis or something like that. I mean, that could expand more because of the advancement in technology. Now we can speak across states or even countries, but still now you can find more specific and narrow causes and common grounds to be part of a community, and that's good in a sense to connect people together. But from the other sense, that's the smaller the communities become, the more, in some sense, isolated we're gonna become, I would think.
So there are two pretty interesting communities that I have found myself in over the past year. One of them is through the IEEE, and it's basically academics and lawyers and technical people who are interested in the subject of ethics and artificial intelligence. And we're part of a working group that's trying to write governance documents to publish that will go out to, governments and corporations throughout the world with suggestions about things they should look at for AI. The other one is one that I just joined last weekend and actually had a pretty good time with, and that's the steampunk community. And I find to be a very interesting bunch of people. And the group that I'm in, there's like 200 members, and they have everything from book authors to artists to makers to people who are specialists in different kinds of teas, because tea is a big deal in the steampunk community.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they're Victorian, right? That's the motif that that steampunk derives from. So, and it's a mixed male and female, but it's by and large a pretty white group from what I can tell, because again, their Victorian England is kind of their role models, but still it's fun and diverse, and boy, people have so many different interests, and it's pretty cool. So one thing to do is to get into as many different kinds of communities as you can, because then you get exposed to ideas that you wouldn't otherwise stumble upon. So I enjoy both of those groups.
I just sent a link called When Your Friend Goes Steampunk. I recommend people watch.
And there's that one that I posted into the group on Facebook to that that hour-long film about the community, which was the thing that actually got me interested in steampunk in the first place. And it turns out the stuff they largely talk about in that film is not what most of the people in this group were interested in. So again, it's more diversity, I think, within the groups. So it's cool.
I bet they're really excited. The steampunk community is excited about that new show that just came out on HBO, right?
Which one?
It's called The Nevers or something like that. Let me Google that. Do you guys know?
Yeah, there's a lot of steampunk themed show.
It's a new one. It's like a big HBO show. The Nevers. It's a steampunk, like feminist show by Joss Whedon.
That's an odd combination, but
yes,
okay.
it is a strange combination, or a fun combination considering the what's been going on. But yeah, so yeah, it's a steampunk show.
Well, most of the Matt Smith Doctor Who was pretty much steampunk. Seemed to spend like half the eps, so it's in Victorian England.
Indeed.
Even the look of the TARDIS ended up kind of, they upgraded to make it look very steampunk.
I think that's one way in which we're sort of trying to fight off the breakdown of community. It's like by social media and just in general, just finding these with our modern tools, finding these small communities that we share the same interests as other people. And I think that's because we can't live without community. So we need to create these communities if we don't have any. But I don't know if that's a substitute. If it's a fully formed substitute for what we perhaps have lost. I'm not really sure, but it seems to me that you guys have brought up this the fact that people don't participate in the community quite as much, as much as they used to participate in church or the bowling clubs or all of those things. I don't know. I think our lives have become less focused on community and more individualistic, and maybe going back to what Carolyn was bringing up as well, that has perhaps affected people's mental health as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
There's a big argument that social media, while yes, you form communities on social media, but it's not the same as actual community, the same as as quote the village or the town square. Part of one of the things is that social media One, because we're not actually physical in contact, and you can be anonymous, so there's no real accountability in that sense. But also because it's very fluid. So yeah, if I get sick of the philosophy group, I can go and join, some other group. I can join the fans of Warrant or something group instead of the philosophy group. So therefore, it's not like if I'm living in a village, it's harder just to say, well, I'm just going to get up and leave the village.
Yeah, I think there's some benefit in that if you don't like what you're doing, it's easier to switch to something new. But that's also a downside because it might disincentivize people to commit to things or invest long term in them.
There's also
Yeah,
the
that's
danger.
one of the thoughts. That kind of touches on one of the thoughts I had as I was reading this. Is I actually previously kind of thought that opposite, like that back thousands of years ago, like the lack of interaction with other people sounds kind of, or like with a lot of other people sounds kind of depressing. And then also like, what if, kind of like small towns, what if like what you get is what you get? You can't, it's harder to up and leave if it's not going well. So that could be a downside, I guess.
That you're saying, like if you live in a small town and you don't like it, well, there's not really, it's not as easy to just find another group because you're in such a, I guess, small town or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, a small town. I mean, you hear a lot of people saying who grew up in small towns saying they can't wait to get out of them because that can be very stifling.
Yeah. Interesting. So, yeah, what do we think about this? So, yeah, like today it's easier than ever to sort of quit something and start something new. Is that a good thing or, yeah, what do you all think?
I think it's good that we have so many opportunities. I think, for example, this is an example of how, it's great that we have these tools to build these communities that are really focused on things that we want to do and that we share the same interests. It's very cool that we can just get together once a week, for example, and talk about these issues, in a more or less serious way, like these are not the kind of conversations that it's, necessarily easy to have with people in your day-to-day life, right? So it's a great opportunity to be able to do this on a regular basis. It's almost like going back to ancient Greece, when people got together to talk philosophy. I thought growing up, when I started like reading some philosophy and stuff, I thought I would never really have the chance to do that because that's really not something that modern people really do as an activity. So, and you can apply that to like people that are interested in like in steampunk culture, right? You can get a bunch of people. Like it wouldn't be easy in just walking, in your neighborhood, trying to find all these people that like steampunk, right? But you can do that with social media. So it's a great opportunity. It's a great tool, but yes, I think the point that you were raising, that how it's so easy now because there are so many tools, right? It's so easy for people to just adopt something and then drop it, or everything's a little bit more flaky, it's like even when you like post something on social media, is people really going to watch these conversations, or are people really going to read what you write? Like there's 7 billion people in the world, and increasingly more have access to social media accounts and stuff like that. Like it's a little bit it's almost like the way it is with community these days. You're surrounded by a lot of people, you're theoretically in contact with a lot of people, but there's also a great potential for people to feel lonely and isolated in the midst of all of it.
So I agree with that, especially the first part that having open communities where you can join any community you want is good. But at the same time, imagine, and that happened before, imagine people from different values, different agendas, different political orientation can join other communities. And if it's a game of numbers, then one community could overwhelm the other and could steer it into a negative direction, let's say, where at this point you can no longer conserve the good values that you had in your community. That's a disadvantage of that open community structure.
Can you give an example of that, Mario, just to have it clear?
Like the first example comes to mind is, for example, when ISIS was trying to build and recruit others, they would, just regular people who are normal in the sense of they go to their work and they do their things, they are approached by kind of a political agenda and ideology that sounds really appealing to them and gives them some sense of identity that they didn't have and they were lacking. Then they would join. We heard a lot of stories where people, from America, from Australia, from other Western cultures, they joined ISIS or groups like that. I mean, there's a lot of examples like that, and that obviously is not a good thing. But the open community structure kind of allowed for that to happen. No.
Well, this is the danger of radicalization, and we see it now really with like QAnon. But what kind of gets people into stuff like into ISIS or QAnon is because you start out with looking for something like, say, for like stories of people QAnon, someone who's interested in like organic diets, and then that starts leading you down road. So I joined a group of organic diets, and someone there says, well, if you like this, you'll like this. Like with ISIS, I'm interested in Islam. Then someone says, okay, well, if you're interested in Islam, maybe you'll like this. These are the people who can tell you about what Islam's actually about.
Yeah,
Go ahead. But
sorry, go ahead, continue.
But this is a problem with the nature of the internet and why social media isn't exactly, because the fluidity of it means that you can choose who you talk to, or you can construct a community. But at the same time, the nature of stuff like how Facebook and YouTube and stuff like that is, it actually radicalizes because it starts giving you suggestions saying, well, if you like this, you'll like this. And it just starts pushing you down a certain direction.
Although, in order for that to be effective, you got to click on the damn thing. And so once again, as I pointed out from the thing about social media last time, the responsibility for this still remains with the user, with the end person, with the receiver rather than the sender, because they can't send me information if I don't click on their damn links. So I get concerned that people always look at this and point and say, oh, it's their fault for sending me this stuff, rather than saying, but it's also my fault for looking at it. Because my looking at it is what feeds the algorithm to send me more.
Well, true, but obviously not everyone's not joining ISIS or becoming a member of QAnon. It basically starts with, if you have a certain proclivity, it will start just feeding that proclivity, push you in directions that you probably wouldn't necessarily think about. I mean, it's also, when I was reading some stuff about people who became radicalized into QAnon, and a lot of this stuff, why more people, especially during the last year, was basically people are feeling lonely, and they said, well, there's this great community. A lot of things you hear, people, they say it's a community of people who get me.
With a lot of those things, the QAnon thing is a great example of that. But in a lot of those sites, like 4chan, 8chan, a lot of those kind of like shady social media sites, there's really people, you can really see how people really want to be a part of something. They want to be a part of community. And And again, it goes back to the fact that in our life today, it's not an organic thing, you know, like, because our lives are so individualistic, especially in the West, especially in the Americas and Europe. I mean, it's a very individualistic life, and that there's something there that isn't quite right. So we need that community. We need to belong to something, and that's, you know, the internet is here now for us, you know, and it allows us to associate with other people with the same interests. So people jump on that because they really need that sense of community, and sometimes to nefarious consequences, you know, effects, like the guy on you know, in New Zealand that, you know, went into a mosque and shot 200 people, and he posted it to social media, to the same site where people used to read the QAnon things, you know, and people were like commenting as they were watching the video of him shooting all the people in the mosque. So, but all those people there, that's an example of something going very wrong with that, looking for community. But usually if it's not those communities that actively, you know, people like encourage each other to promote or to do evil or to do, you know, clearly bad things for the world, I think it's better, at least if people have that sense of belonging in some sense, than to become individualistic in a way that is destructive, and it's destructive to them and to society. Like the kids that start shooting up schools, you know, like Columbine kids, for example. Probably the problem there, I don't know, like, I don't know exactly what happened, but I think like that's a case, for example, there was clearly a problem that they didn't belong, right? And when people don't belong, you see that in the United States a lot more than even in any other country in the world. You know, a lot of these shootings, these people don't belong. They're misfits, and they really like lack community. And that's a problem for a human, because we are so social, like the way we can commence the conversation, right? Talking about the social component of the human, of people.
Radicalization into groups like QAnon or ISIS is almost a flip side, is people belong too much. They basically subsume their identity to that community.
Yeah, it's a pathology for sure. But the longing is there, right? To belong to a community, and that's like something quite fundamental. And it's essentially what we're doing here. We're trying to build a community based on a certain number of interests and values, right? And you can do that by trying to make the world a better place and discuss philosophy, or you can try to do that by, you know, a certain maybe white supremacy and misogynistic ideals, or whatever it is, you know, like you can do that by joining Islamic fundamentalist terrorist organizations. You know, there are a number of ways that it can go in. Like it can go in very nice ways and very bad ways for other people, essentially. But the mechanism is the same, right? You find people that share the same interests, that share the same concerns, that share sort of like the same way of looking at things, and you try to build a community around that because you're really drawn to that, to building something together. And it's something that it's hard to do in real life today, maybe ever, I don't know, but certainly today, it's societies are very individualistic.
Well, you have to look at two things that can radicalize people to draw you in. There's a confirmation bias, in terms of that I'm going to have a bias towards things that tends to reinforce what I view. And then there's an echo chamber that just adds to that. That's kind of how people get radicalized. I mean, if I'm, again, using the ISIS example, if I'm interested in Islam and I think the West is not a good place to practice Islam, I want to learn more about Islam. If I find a group online that says, well, yes, the West is not good, America is not a good place to practice Islam, and well, you should come to Syria, see how it just starts leading down the path of radicalization.
Oh, David, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you're.
If I understand what you're saying, the internet gave us the tools to build silos, echo chambers, and we may not always use those tools for the right things, you know. Does that make any
This-
sense?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, this is a conversation I have with Craig a lot. Is as a fan of golden age science fiction, this idea that once we had global communications, all of humanity would become one. We'd have this Gene Roddenberry world. In
Well,
fact,
that
the
turned out
opposite
not to
happened.
be true.
No, it's not true at all because humans just don't work that way.
And earlier about Columbine, the people that did that or do mass shootings of any kind, I tend to gravitate towards a little more common sense gun control, but I don't see how more gun control is going to give the people who did things like Columbine a sense of belonging. And so that is a real challenge. In other words, the problem that stimulates the mass shootings, it's like Frederick Douglass said, you pass laws to address the effects and leave the cause untouched.
Yeah, it just addresses the symptoms, but not the cause. Yeah.
Right.
Which is something, but more should be done.
Yeah. And the symptoms need to be addressed, but it's not going to go away until you address the cause, in my opinion.
Yeah, you gotta deal with both. I mean, certainly the symptoms and the cause, I guess, as we're putting it. A lot of those things could be avoided by using some degree of gun control, and it wouldn't really need to be a whole lot. I mean, there's just some common sense stuff really that could be implemented that would drastically reduce that. But I mean, certainly the root cause, yeah, I think it's a lot of it is young man, not belonging to something, and that's that's in general, like people, it's a very individualistic society, and I think there's a problem there. It's good that we're able to do these groups, though, find these groups with social media, though. That in that sense, it's good. And yes, there are problems like where you're talking about the silos and all that. Yeah, but as a general rule, I mean, I am glad that we have the possibility now to at least find some solace in creating these groups.
Yeah, and I find it like going back to young men that don't belong. I guess women, but often men might take it out more using aggression. But it's like a lot of like people, like when they don't see a clear path for them in the future that'll lead to any chance of success, that's sort of when they start to become violent, or when they see they're not accepted in the community and they don't really see a way forward, or like how they're going to progress with their life. That's often when they turn to that kind of violence.
Yeah, that even applies to pirates, because before we started recording, we were talking about pirates. I mean, that's actually something that it's common for, like those pirates in the golden age of piracy, which is usually normal people, sort of normal people, sailors and, stuff like that, that they just, yeah, they didn't see really a way forward, like you're saying. So they resorted to bad alternatives. And that applies to pretty much anything, right? People in gangs, usually it's because they can't find a good alternative, and they're young people and they join this because they can't really join anything else. Young men are pretty, you gotta guide them right, because they're kind of like dangerous if they go down the wrong path early on.
Well, gangs are also a sense of community too. I mean, that is a sense of identity and belonging.
Yeah, exactly. Not so different from joining ISIS, right? You're joining a group that will give you a sense of belonging, that will give you direction, that will give you protection, purpose. But it's not just for those bad groups, right? I think it's interesting because we're zooming in on something that is very essential about communities, that it does, these communities, they provide us with that. And in some ways we need those smaller communities, because if you live in a city, before you would find a sense of belonging just from being from a certain place, right? In Athens, for example, you know, or any ancient city. I mean, it was small enough that you could find a sense of community there. But now we live in a metro area of 3 million people. We're not going to find much of a sense of community with 3 million other people, right? There's too many people. So, and that's common for pretty much any modern city.
So help me understand the how to work together, the need for community and an individualistic society. I'm not quite getting that. How does that, in other words, can you be individualistic but still want to belong to a community? I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, maybe I didn't explain myself correctly. No, what I'm saying is that our society is individualistic, right? I mean, it guides us towards that path. It drives us towards that path. But our nature is not individualistic. We might be individualistic in some sense, but we do need that collective, right? That's, I don't know if, you know, it's an extrapolation, but it seems that there's something even biological about the fact that we all seem to need that kind of sense of belonging, being part of a community, right? And it doesn't matter if our society is organized in a very individualistic way, you know, it doesn't matter, because we still have that inside of us. And that creates the dichotomy, that creates the problems that are mental, there's something wrong, right? I mean, I feel that myself, you know. I live a very individualistic life, always have, but I have that sense that I want to belong to a group. I want to belong to a community. I want to be a part of something, right? And I think I felt that as a young man. I feel that now as a grown man, you know. I imagine that that's what a lot of people feel.
Individualism, as we kind of think of it now, is kind of a growth of the Enlightenment. I mean, individualism kind of came about, you know, we can look at things like rationalism and like Cartesianism about, we can reduce everything to just me, I exist. That's kind of been sort of a foundation of kind of what our current like philosophical, or I guess ontological view of things is, that we can state that I exist, therefore I am an individual. I don't think for a lot of history in most cultures that wasn't necessarily thought of it as that. I mean, certainly Confucian culture or philosophy is not really about the individual. It's about essentially how a society functions. And the individual is essentially just a valued individual, is really just part of the society.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Are we too individualistic, or do we need to be a little bit more collectivist?
It's a good question. Yeah.
That is, yeah, very good question. I'll think on that and get back to you.
Well, it's yes and no. I mean, I should say actually our view of individualism goes back a little further, maybe back to essentially back to Greek philosophy. But the Greeks themselves were divided too, because Sparta was a very unindividualistic society. It was all about the society, the functions, whereas the Athenians did consider, I mean, the fact of democracy would consider that there is value to an individual opinion. Otherwise, why even bother having people contribute into a collective decision?
Right, but even then, there was a lot more sense of a collective way of living, you know, like even Athenians. I mean, they were pretty, you know, you would be part of the army, you know, almost everybody participated in the army at some point. They shared.
Unless you were a slave, of course.
No, yeah, unless you were a slave, and then you weren't really even considered a citizen. But as far as from the perspective of the citizens, and they were part of like communal groups that they often did things together. They ate together. I mean, it was still, I mean, maybe not quite as Sparta, which was a completely totalitarian society, but I mean, even for by our standards, that was a very collectivistic society, the Athenian society still, That's the thing, is that our standards are very individualistic.
Right. Yeah. And there's all other factors too. I mean, in ancient Greece, in both Athens and well, pretty much any of the Greek city states, but even extended to the Romans, was that exile was equivalent to death. I mean, ostracism was reserved for only the most serious crimes. And back then, pretty much, yeah, if you just were forced to live outside of society by yourself, there's pretty much a good chance you would die. I mean, the dependence upon that. Whereas once we get into an industrialized society, yeah, we still depend on a lot of people, but there is this kind of idea we can, I could go live up in the mountains largely by myself and not really bother seeing anybody. I mean, it wouldn't be easy, but I could still maintain at least the same level of comfort. Now I'd have to buy stuff and everything, but I could just have it delivered. I wouldn't have to even see the people delivering it. And I could work remotely.
COVID, a lot of people are like that. They just get food delivered in, they work from home, that they barely even need to see anyone. But yeah.
And even,
in the past year, it's really pushed that even more.
Yeah, even more so now. I was going to say, yeah, even more so now. And that's probably not going to go away, right? We've seen what usually would have taken us 10 years to get to this point. But in just 1 year, we just became even more individualistic because now we realize we don't need to go to supermarket. Like I used to go to supermarket. It's not really necessary. You can just order food from the supermarket, right? And that's true for, I mean, I'm using that example, but it can be anything. Like we can order anything in, we can work from home, like it's.
I feel very comfortable ordering stuff online, ordering canned foods, box foods, but I don't feel comfortable getting produce online.
Produce.
I really, because I want to pick that out.
I mean, something that bothers me is like I don't really like to order clothes online, like shoes and stuff like that. I don't really have like functional shoes almost anymore because mine are old and kind of raggedy, and I don't really feel comfortable ordering shoes online because I don't know if they're going to fit properly. But yeah, that's just a stupid parenthesis.
But I guess what I'm saying is they're maybe not for everyone. And maybe not in the future, but for the moment, there are a lot of people that don't feel comfortable getting perishable goods online, or clothes,
Yeah, no, for sure.
I've ordered shoes online, and one pair fit really well. And the second pair I ordered did not fit at all.
It's tricky.
So I haven't. I'm batting 500.
It's not bad actually for shoes, for ordering shoes.
Yeah. Well, when I picked out my shoes in the store, I batted 1,000.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Well, there are online ones that you can try it and send it back if it doesn't fit. So.
That's true. But it doesn't satisfy that need for immediate gratification if I have to send it back.
Right.
And I'm going to link this to the concept of happiness. I remember a while ago, I was very interested in the concept of happiness, and I watched some documentaries about it. And one thing that always came up is that these people that have researched happiness, they found that really one of the biggest indicators, the key indicators for if people are happy or not in a certain place, is how strong their community is, their integration with the community. And it seems that that really translates into a big difference in terms of how people perceive their state of happiness. People are much, much happier when they have strong links with some community. and they are usually not that happy when they are living very individualistic lives without a strong connection to the community. And that it even goes further than that. Those people live longer, which is kind of crazy to think, but that's actually what came up in a lot of these studies, is that the places in the world where people live the longest are also the place where they have the strongest communities. Because apparently, you know, people that are happier tend to live longest. They've found the same results in animals as well, in like rats and stuff.
I think there's a book, The Village Effect, and it's written by Susan. I think it's Susan Pinker, not Steven Pinker. But yeah, she talks about how having a community like extends your lifespan.
It's the number one factor that they've found to determine if people are gonna be happier or sadder, and if they're gonna, if you know, even if they're gonna live longer or not. You
The
know,
blue zones.
what?
The blue zone. The blue zones. Does that ring any bells?
I've heard of the blue zones. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was exact. I think.
Yeah, it rings a bell. Oh, isn't it like the people who live the longest?
Yeah, there's like a couple areas in the world where people live like especially long, and like they analyze their diet and a whole bunch of other things.
And my understanding is they didn't just have long lifespans; they had a long health span.
Exactly. That's also something that they found. Yeah, like Okinawa, for example, that's one of the places in the world where people seem to be happiest and live the longest. And that's a place where they have a lot of still very like strong ties to the community. That's also true for Spain. I was going to say something, I forgot. Sorry. But
Linda, Okinawa, Loma Linda is in California in North America. Okinawa, Japan. I think a village on the Mediterranean. I can't remember the name of it, but
oh yeah,
and there's a few more.
True.
It's like some valley in like Sichuan, China.
And also another place is also Scandinavia. So I was going to say that's what I forgot. So in Scandinavia, what they found was that you have a number of people, this is kind of a modern trend, that they've realized, and this kind of like segues into something I wanted to ask you. They've been like dropping the concept of nuclear family, this very Western, very modern concept that you live with your spouse and your kid, or your 2 kids or your 3 kids, and that's the nuclear family, and that's pretty much what you do. In the States, it's even like a step above, right? Because you live in the suburbs and you're like isolated from pretty much everybody else. You know, you just live in your house and with your nuclear family, and you have, you go to work, right? That's all, but you don't even live really in a community. I mean, the suburbs is like, you're isolated. You're like in your little island. But
I understand what you're saying, but it's my understanding that the nuclear family as a widespread concept is about 100 years old.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah,
which is not very long.
No, it's not very long at all. And they are, in this documentary, there was a number of people that were dropping this nuclear family, and they were actually living in like big, it was like apartment complexes or something like that. But they didn't really live with the traditional, this is my place, this is your place. It was sort of like everybody lived in the complex, right? And all the kids would spend time together, after school. They would just come home and, they would all hang out in the same house, a bunch of kids when they were the same age, they usually hang out together. The old people did the same thing. The young people did the same thing. It was more divided along age lines, and they all ate together. So even like age lines, there wasn't a big difference for they all had dinner together, it was intergenerational as well, and they all felt great, and I remember they said, well, look, I don't have grandparents, but here I have a lot of grandparents, the little kids, and I love all my grandparents, and this provided them with a sense of community that people, honestly, I mean, nobody has that sense of community anymore. Even our own grandparents, how many people have constant contact with their grandparents today? I mean, it's difficult, So, but these kids, kids like to have a big family. They like to have a bunch of grandparents. They like to have a bunch of parents. So, instead of having one mom, they had 10 moms that would take care of them. It's nice. It's nice to have a big and that was probably what it was like, when people lived in tribes, is that there wasn't that clear separation. Oh no, this is my kid. I'm going to be with my kid. You're going to be with your kid. And that's it, and maybe you'll go and, we'll do a sleepover once a month. That's not great for anybody.
Well, that's the concept behind kibbutzes or communes.
Yeah. So, this idea of community, I think it's even more important than we sometimes think.
It may be true overall, but one of the things that popped into my head is if I lived in an intergenerational home, I'm a little bit not sure it would go well.
Also,
Well, it's probably not for everybody.
yeah, it's not for everybody. Yeah. But
In a nutshell, more opportunity for conflict.
yeah, maybe there's a lot of conflict in some of these situations. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I guess earlier in history, values didn't change as much from generation to generation, but nowadays values change super fast. So yeah, I guess, I don't know if that makes it more difficult.
I'm sure I'd be telling a lot of you to get off my lawn, so there you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What do you mean by values change faster? Not about the getting off my lawn, but about the values. What do you mean by that, Michael?
Yeah, I guess as far as, we're very, our generation is kind of very addicted to technology, whereas a lot of older people, they don't like it, they want to meet in person. I guess just different ways of living. Often younger people just don't see eye to eye with some of the older generation. It's not, I guess it's not a black and white statement. It's just kind of a generalization, but yeah.
This is a slightly different topic, but the same principle is at work, I think.
Yeah.
If you were an accountant and you started your practice, an accountant.
Accountant. Okay.
Yeah. And you started your practice in the late 1950s, the discipline and the industry would have changed very little during your entire career. And now, if you're an accountant, if you were an accountant in the early 90s and you're still in practice today, things are very different now. Very. So
yeah.
People have to adapt, and that's not exactly the same thing, but I think the same principle is at work.
Yeah.
The pace of change is so much faster now. If you think about it, if living at the start of the 21st century is very different than living at the start of the 20th century. Whereas if you were living at the start of the 15th century, it probably wasn't that much different than if you're living at the start of the 14th century.
Exactly. So historically, a lot of times, your grandparents, they lived in very similar situations to you. So they would pass on the things that they learned to help you. But the thing is, nowadays, since things change so quickly, often your grandparents lived a completely different life when they were kids. So that sort of knowledge might not be as relevant. I mean, I'm making big generalizations here. Very big.
Let me put it this way. If you took a farmer from ancient Rome and moved them in through time to 1900. Most people, even though the steam engine was invented, most farmers did not have steam engines. Most of the world was malnourished and barely surviving. Most of the world, not all of the world, but most of it. And if you took a farmer from ancient Rome and transported them through time to the year 1900, in a couple of weeks, you could have taught them everything you were doing and they would have understood it. If you took a farmer from 1900 and brought them onto a farm today, it would take them the rest of their lives to understand what you were doing.
Mhm.
With giant combine machines and GPS and crop, that. So just illustrative of what Shashir was saying is how the pace of change has changed.
Yeah. The derivative has increased. So like we're
Knee of the curve.
accelerating. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's another factor, though, in saying why community is breaking down. Because intergenerational relationships aren't just separated by, say, attitudes, but separated by technology and just complete worldview.
Yeah. Like you used to have certain churches would carry on from generation to generation, or synagogues, but nowadays it's like, or at least from what I've seen, like Jewish synagogues often just tend to come and go much quicker than they used to. Because yeah, there's less binding one generation to the next since there's so much change, I guess.
Yeah, just it's 9 o'clock, so maybe we can start thinking about finishing up. Just so last question, like how do you guys think we can like build better communities in the 21st century? Like what can we do better? What are we lacking that we can do better? Sort of like to end on a positive note or constructive.
Yeah. What do we replace the broken down communities with? Something better, I hope.
Groups like these. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like a lot of us met each other through meetup.com.
Yeah. Sure. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like trying to build positive groups. Is that what you guys mean? Like positive?
Yeah, like we met each other on the internet through a common interest, philosophy in this case.
Yeah, and I think the face-to-face interaction that we have is very valuable. Like not just, posting comments on a forum, because you can kind of get lost in your own reality doing that, just messaging back and forth, 1,000 times. But yeah, I think it's good that we speak face to face.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the whole posting stuff, like it's a great thing that people have these groups on Facebook, and like I post our videos on these groups on Facebook, and not to any effect really. It seems that people just ignore it. But I mean, honestly, well, no, but you found us on YouTube actually. You didn't find us on Facebook. And so did
That's
Vonnie.
true.
Nobody has found us on Facebook, I gotta say. So it's a completely ineffective for some reason. I must not
be right. Whole different community connected to Facebook, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I've tried, but we so far we haven't really recruited anybody from Facebook, really. But what was I saying? I was saying that the whole thing. So the way these groups really operate on a day-to-day basis, it's completely, like, honestly, it's like useless, I think, in my opinion. You just post something and like a question or something, and then someone will reply to you or will write a post with some sentences. Some people write long posts, but at the end of the day, there's no real conversation. People are just kind of like coming up with something that comes to their head, to their mind. And at the very best or worst, there's an exchange of 3, 4, 5 posts, and it's really just people trying to make a point over each other. It's not a real conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes people don't listen to other people. They spend the whole time that other people are talking trying to think of what they're going to say next.
Yeah.
Well, I'm doing that right now.
I mean, for example, what we do here is like the same thing as getting together and having coffee in person, except we're not in the same place. But it's a real conversation. But the interaction,
Purple coffee.
Yeah, or some wine. I had some coffee. But like, the just posting something on the internet or following someone on Twitter or something like that. These like very basic interactions. I don't think that's real, like a real human interaction, right? It's not a real thing.
I don't know. I think this depends how you. I mean, I've had some very fruitful discussions. The people just going on BBSs by just posting. You got to think about. I mean, it used to be like if we talk about the founding fathers, where people would exchange letters or actually write pamphlets. Basically, at the time of the founding fathers, the BBS, well, in fact, bulletin board is actually a physical thing. Is you would write a pamphlet, somebody else would write another pamphlet, and just respond. You look at the debates between like Jefferson and the Federalists.
Well, but you can't possibly compare that to a Facebook debate. I mean, it's
no, but
conversation.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that sometimes, from my experience, can be very shallow. But really, I think what Shashir is getting at is, what is the pamphlet of today?
It's basically Facebook and Twitter. I mean, there was a lot of shallow stuff. You read some of the stuff that they're writing about each other. I mean, accusing, Jefferson of fostering, illegitimate children, which he actually did, or, accusing Hamilton of being a cannibal. I mean, they were doing stuff like that before. They were having flame wars long before was it.
That's interesting. I would have never thought of that, like a bulletin board, like he said.
I think that was
in a lot of ways that currently the blog is, or maybe that's already passé, but the blog is kind of the bulletin board or the pamphlet kind of thing. But it's a one-way. The problem with those things are they're generally one-way conversations, and what you really want to get are what are called real-time synchronous conversations, which is what we got here.
I think you're correct. But Thomas Paine's pamphlets were one way.
Sure.
He didn't interact with the people who read it. Well,
I read Plato. I mean, is this a dialogue? Yeah. No, it's actually it's an imaginary dialogue in my head that goes on with it. But
yeah, we communicate like a lot with our facial expressions. Like when you're just posting on a forum, you can't see how the person reacted to it. So you're just reading literal words, but there's no like, did they feel jealous? Did they feel shocked? Did they feel angry? Did they feel elated? Like you can't see what their reaction is. And they try to sort of fix that by adding those react buttons, although it doesn't really do it 100%.
Somebody mentioned to me one time, this was back in the late 90s. They said the problem with email is there's no inflection.
There's no inflection.
I said, now there is inflection, but it's in the mind of the reader, not the writer.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, oh, I'm sorry, go on, Bruno.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like when you read an email, you're kind of putting your own emotion on what you're reading instead of actually seeing the emotion of the person saying it.
I think the email kind of illustrates a problem that I have, and I'm not anti-technology at all. I mean, I'm trying to adopt as much technology as possible to make things better. But technology has the problem of, I mean, these technologies that we're talking about, they have the common problem of they sort of like make things shallow. You know, they make communication shallow. Like the email is a good example of, like, I remember when I was younger, and there was no email, or I didn't use email, and I would like correspond with people, like when I was a kid, via letter. You know, like I would write, you know, my grandparents' letters. You know, I wouldn't send them an email. I probably wouldn't send them an email today, frankly, because I don't know if they do email, but but certainly not back then. You know, and writing a letter is a completely different experience than writing an email.
It is.
And reading a letter is a completely different experience, right? You are having a real communication. Sometimes it's even more intense than when you're in front of someone, right? Because you're really trying to, it's almost like writing a small book that, or not a book, but, you know, a small short story that you're communicating
An
with.
essay.
Yeah, there's a literary quality to it, right? If you take it somewhere, you know, you don't even need to take it seriously. But, you know, if you try to do something that is okay, you know, there's a literary quality to it. And writing an email simply does not, you know, especially today. I think maybe in the beginning,
Well,
people kind of like try to write a letter in an email. Today, it's like, yeah, you write some like smiley faces and stuff, you know, like it's just not the same thing.
Well, the concerns that I agree with you. The concerns that you expressed about shallowness and so forth, all of those same concerns were raised about writing, about the telegraph, about the telephone, about newspapers, television. All those things were raised about those things as well. And they have their good sides and their bad sides, you know. So I just thought I would point that out for perspective.
And you're right, but those are, I think that's kind of like, I want to finish on that note for myself. I think adopting technology, but in the right ways to build communities in the right way. I think that's the way I can personally try to build communities to improve things. And I find great joy in being part, for example, of this community. You know, I find great joy in finding other people that I share stuff with. You know, it would be, it's an ugly life to be lonely and not to be able to express your thoughts to people that will understand you.
Right, that's true. But I was just going to follow up. I think in terms of, yes, our society has gotten faster, and there's more of an emphasis on just, I mean, when people started texting because of the limitations of the alphanumeric keyboard, or basically the numerical keyboard, started leading people to making things shorter. But we have the technology to do it. I mean, you can write long emails. I mean, obviously Twitter is a different animal, but Twitter's an outgrowth from texting.
Man, I to be honest with the emails, I even like stop reading my emails. I have a problem that I receive so many emails, and I don't even like have a job that I have to like reply to these emails for my job. It's just that I think I really need to find, like, just get a different email account, but because at this point I get so many emails that I've even like stopped reading emails, let alone writing them.
Well, yeah, spam is a lot of stuff, but we used to get junk mail. Well, we still get junk mail. In terms of expressing emotion, I mean, if you've read like the correspondence between Vincent van Gogh and his brother, I mean, there's a lot of emotions expressed in it. It's just a lack of a lack of the language. People kind of losing the kind of nature of rhetoric, but how you can express emotions and stuff through language.
Yeah, and I know you guys are going to hate me for mentioning this, but Steven Pinker wrote a book about usage language usage. It kind of like Strunk and White's Elements of Style and all of that. And there's a section in there about the state of language today. You know, how it's some people, because of the issue Michael raised earlier, you know, people not using words and not communicating in complete sentences and things like that. And Pinker talked about all that, and he says, yeah, it's totally unlike the 1980s when teenage language use was superb. And then I'm just saying,
he's being sarcastic, right? He's saying like,
definitely.
yeah, people, language usage has never been super duper sophisticated. Yeah.
Well, and he was asked to be on the board of directors of a company that does dictionaries. I can't remember if it was Merriam-Webster or who it was. And because he had written some books about language, and he had board of one of these dictionary companies, and he didn't have any experience in the industry. You know, he's a college professor. He didn't know anything about publishing dictionaries, but they thought he was wise about language and its usage, and so they asked him to be on the board. And he showed up, and he met the manager or CEO of the company, and he said, and he asked, so how do you decide what words mean? And the CEO said, we don't decide what words mean. Dictionaries are not they are descriptive, not prescriptive.
They describe how we use it, but
that's
they
right.
don't.
They describe usage. They don't make the usage.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because English, living languages are always going to be that way. With like a dead language like Latin or Greek, it's prescriptive at that point because it's dead. It's not going to change meaning.
I was talking to somebody and I said something about, and then they myrtleized it. And they said, you just made that word up. And I said, all words are made up. And if you understand what it means the first time I use it, then it's a word.
Yeah.
So for my nickel, the thing that really made writing kind of go down the toilet, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, is that we stopped writing in letters in cursive, because writing that way is a very artistic and emotionally expressive form of writing, whereas now just typing things in block letters is where you lose all that. And that's why your emails suck when you read them, Bruno, is because if they were written in handwritten, beautiful script, you could tell, A, that the person who's writing them cares about what they're doing, and B, that this is how you can express emotion almost as well as writing music as you can by writing cursive. And I kind of whack myself upside the head every day that I'm not any better at it than I was. And at one point I was trying to learn calligraphy, because calligraphy is kind of the master art form of that whole thing. But if people went back to putting that kind of more of a personal touch into their communications, I bet the quality of communications would rise immensely, and there'd be a whole lot less of them too. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing either. So that's my nickels worth on that.
Very interesting.
Try writing a running script in Chinese.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but yeah, like when people used to write letters, often you could see through the handwriting if they looked like fearful, like just by the way something was written. If it was written like really nice and elegantly, then maybe that means they were like happy or in a good mood, but you could like tell from the way it's written somewhat, how they're feeling.
Well, there's a whole field of forensic science and handwriting analysis.
But does that just try to see if your signature is authentic or fake, or does that try to see if like your emotion?
No, it goes deep into the woo-woo area.
No, yeah, it tries to reveal stuff about the person that wrote it.
It's legitimacy to it, but some people take it to the extremes, like astrology or something.
Yeah, graphology is a thing, but it's not nearly as much of a thing as we at one time would have thought it was. So, but people still do it, and there are still some useful things that you can derive from it. It's just, it isn't a be-all,
What
end-all.
Craig is saying, if I understand what you're saying, is graphology is about as useful to human beings as ornithology is to birds.
Yeah. Very useful.
I don't know, because if I was a species of bird and my species was wind up being saved and preserved by an ornithologist, I'd be damn grateful. So I'm not sure I'm not gonna make that analogy.
I didn't say it was totally useless. I just was making a point, illustrating a point.
Well, I wrote like all these questions here about community. Like now I'm annoyed that I don't really know how to write in cursive anymore, you know?
I do.
Maybe I
But
have
then I learned.
I have to learn it again because I really don't. I forgot.
Carolyn, did you ever learn to write in cursive?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Oh, you're asking Carolyn.
Yeah,
Did
in
you,
third
Michael?
grade.
I spent like maybe 2 days for like 2 days in school, they just quickly ran it by us, but they never required us to write in cursive.
Okay, so now here's the real question. Who writes in cursive today?
Other than my signature, no.
Yeah, that's it.
Other than my signature, I don't. So even among people who appreciate it, it has gone away. Not gone away, but it's not used regularly.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid. I mean, I think I had to write in cursive in school.
Well, yeah, they'd whack you on the hand if you did it
Some
wrong.
people
I
can't
have a
read
friend who
cursive.
is a poet who writes real letters in cursive, and she's got beautiful handwriting, and I'm quite envious of it. But there are a few around. A lot of them, from what I can tell, tend to be artistic people to begin with. So as an artistic expression form for them, they've cultivated it.
There's a big debate in architecture circles and design circles about the tools of production and regarding, because I do everything on computer now, but I still draw by hand now and then. There's a big debate about, what is the difference between using a mouse or using a pencil, and about how it changes how we design. And there's been attempts to actually design like big touch screens. So basically you draw on them like you would draw on a sheet of paper.
That's interesting.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just said that's a cool innovation. That's all I did.
I think that the changes in how we express ourselves are important and valuable, and sometimes detrimental. But in no event are they as important as what goes on in your head to get a concept, an idea on paper, whether it's writing longhand with a fountain pen or typing on keyboard. The important thing is in here, to me,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and maybe Michael has seen or noticed this too, but when I've talked to mathematicians about things in the 20th century, many mathematicians, what the greatest change in mathematics in the 20th century was? The decline of the blackboard.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was such an important part of mathematics, both in practice and in education for so long. And you could tell that they were very much like artists and painters up there where they'd be scribbling down their equations, and then the guy would use his jacket sleeve to erase something and put it on. It was really remarkable. And you just don't, I mean, you don't do that stuff with a whiteboard and a dry erase marker anymore. And so it's interesting how the technology, the mode of expression affects the value of the expression. And philosophically, I think that's actually a pretty interesting subject area.
I understand what you're saying, and I miss some of those things too. But at the same time, when I was in school, a professor could not circle a word on the blackboard and make it flash and say, this is important. Write this down, you dumbasses.
To the design point, though, there is something to be said to be able to actually see something in 3D and design it 3D versus if I'm just drawing a 2D thing and I want to cut a section, well, then I got to actually try to draw the section to figure it out rather than understanding, okay, these pieces fit together and this is what it'll look like in 3D.
True, although
Well,
that was the whole field of projective geometry and things like that to do perspective drawing. And we could go back to like Da Vinci and Albrecht Dürer about how they came up with the geometry of art in order to realize those kinds of imaginings, even on the flat, on a two-dimensional surface.
Yeah, that was a big thing of Brunelleschi, but it's still, Brunelleschi, yeah, when he designed the Cathedral of Florence, yeah, he looked at creating perspective, figure it out. He couldn't, though, take it and just kind of spin it around and cut it. I mean, he could build a physical model, but it'd be a lot harder to just sit there cutting in half to see actually the construction. Whereas, yeah, working on the software I have, I could cut it in half, and because I've already determined what the construction is, I could start seeing how it works together.
to me, the main thing about written communication is it allows human beings to do three very important things. We can communicate at a distance, and we can communicate through time. And as a result, well, before I get to that, all of the changes and advances in communication have just made it easier to do those two things. They have not improved the thinking that goes into those two things. That's our job.
Neuralink might do that.
It could, but well, that's my main point. So I agree with you. I'm just trying to expand on that a little bit.
Well, guys, any final thoughts on community?
Going off like the writing thing, one thing that popped into my mind is I've read some personality types might express themselves more easily in writing versus verbally.
True. Yeah, I mean, Hemingway said, I think it was when he accepted the Oscar, the Nobel Prize. He said, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's when he accepted the Nobel Prize. He said, I don't have, it was something to the effect that I don't have a whole lot to say because I'm a writer and writers write.
Yeah, I wonder that. Like, so.
Which was a great way to accept the Nobel Prize of Literature.
What if before the invention of writing, there were all these really smart, really people who would be brilliant writers, but because they didn't have writing, people just saw them as like dummies. So all that brilliance was lost. Yeah, it's just an interesting final thought.
That's true. Although I have trouble believing that Hemingway would come across as a dummy, but I don't know. I haven't met him. No, I think he was just trying to make a point, right? That he was a cool guy, Hemingway. They just released a document. I haven't seen it yet, but Ken Burns, I think, made a documentary about him.
6-parter?
What?
Is it 6 parts?
It's on PBS.
I know.
I don't know. I haven't seen it. but I love Hemingway.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
I think a new Audible edition of The Old Man and the Sea has just come out, and Jeff Daniels is reading it.
Oh, really? Wow, that's a good combination. Hemingway, Jeff Daniels. That's a really good combination. But yeah, final thoughts on community for me is that I'm really thankful for you guys, for this community, and I hope we can keep expanding and create how cool would it be if we created like a really strong community, philosophy community on YouTube? I think that would be really cool, so I don't think there's something quite like that out there on YouTube. Maybe there is, and I don't know about it,
We're first.
But I think it would be really cool. And yeah, and you found us on YouTube. You didn't even find us anywhere else, David. You just like YouTube. Can I join? And I hope we get some more people like that. That's how Vladimir found us as well.
Where is Vladimir this week?
Vladimir? Oh, that's a good question. Maybe he didn't wake up.
I saw you did a one-on-one with him, and did he get a new camera?
He got a new camera and he looks so good, man.
Yeah.
Vladimir's like a different person.
I thought he was. I thought it was Hagrid.
Yeah, he looks different on camera, like with the nice camera. So
but he looks sharp.
He looks sharp. He sounds sharp and he looks sharp. Has a good mind. Hopefully we'll have him here next week, next Friday. But yeah, thanks for, I'm very thankful for you guys. One day, like in a year from now, we're going to be having these conversations, and we're going to be having like people write comments at the same time, 100 people, 200 people watching, hopefully.
I'm for it.
All right, guys. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks for watching, guys.
All right.